I did not think that we would see the end of this currency's life cycle in my lifetime. And I've been studying currency life cycles since 1987. But it's here, and I'm not going to deny it. And that's what nobody else really seems to talk about, that this is the end of this current experiment, and they have to reset us into a new system.
Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Today I would like to welcome a special guest to the channel. She's a prepper, a stacker, a former banker and stockbroker, and the chief market analyst at ITM Trading. I'm very excited to welcome Lynette Zang to the channel and get some of her insights into the economic mess that we find ourselves in. So welcome to the channel, Lynette. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, Smart Silver Stacker. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems to me like we are on the brink of an inflection point here in the economy. Things seem to be reaching a bit of a critical mass. I think big shifts are around the corner for this global economy. And I'd like to hear what kind of changes you think we might witness in the near future and what viewers need to be preparing themselves for.
Well, number one, the banking crisis that became apparent in March is not over yet. And especially with this higher for longer mantra, I think you're going to see, it would not surprise me whatsoever to see another bigger banking crisis erupt and shock everybody. But it shouldn't be shocking because we just saw the little itty bitty tip of the iceberg. The other thing that I'm thinking is that I'm not really sure that we are fully aware of how close the central banks are to shifting us into that CBDC, that central bank digital currency. I know that the IMF is working on a one world currency, and that would allow like a local currency like the digital dollar, and then the IMF's SDR, although they'll call it an MCM, central bank digital currency. I think that's very close. So, and when people are scared enough, they'll present that as a solution. And here, of course, the Fed Now accounts went into effect in July, which means whether you realize it or not, everybody basically has an account with the central bank, with the Federal Reserve. So I think we've got definitely a bigger crisis looming. And I think that, quite honestly, the whole system is so fragile that could unfold any time. It's not something that I'm looking at in any level of a distant future, which is why I'm so glad I'm a prepper, because I am definitely prepared to feed and house 40 people. And I think we all need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, that seems to be a wise way to position yourself as we face these multiple potential economic crises. I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you think about this potential for a banking crisis. Following last week's FOMC meeting, we did see that revised Fed dot plot. So the plan seems to be to keep rates higher for longer. And even just in the past few trading sessions, we've seen the yield on US Treasuries spiking up as the debt market sells off in response to this. I think last time I looked, the 10-year yield level that it's risen to, it hasn't been that high since 2007, right before the onset of the Great Recession. So how much higher do you think yields can go before these banks who are sitting on all of these portfolios of devaluing bonds, how much more can they take before we're forced to see some kind of an intervention on the part of the Fed or the Treasury?
That's a great question, really. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking at too is in 2008, and I said this then and I'm saying this today, the system really died in 2008. So for you to refer back to interest rate yields where they were in 2007, which is when technically the cracks were already starting to implode. The public just didn't see it until September of 2008. But the whole crisis already began, and I back in 2007, and I would honestly say that the crisis has already begun in 2023. Now, part of the challenge for the public in understanding what's happening is that the guys that create these derivatives, which are just a big leverage bet, and most of them are done against interest rates, and that those interest rates have risen so dramatically in such a short period of time that there is no way on God's green earth that there aren't some of these contracts that are exploding and exploding and exploding. But it is the guys that create these contracts that get to determine whether or not there is a default in these contracts, and therefore they have the ability to keep this garbage hidden a lot longer than we would think, right? But there is no bank that is immune for this. And you had Jamie Dimon come out and even say, I think it was just yesterday or just recently, that the markets aren't ready for a 7% interest rate rise. So, I would agree with that. I don't think the markets were prepared for a 5%, and we're past that now. So I can't tell you when it's going to become apparent to the public. That's always the biggest challenge, but there's already major problems that are happening throughout the system. And by the time the public sees it, frankly, it's too late to do anything about it. So, that's why stacking gold, silver, but also putting in place food, water, energy security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. I mean, that's critical because you don't have time to do that the moment before the crisis becomes apparent. I started in 2008, I knew the system died. So and I'd been accumulating and stacking both gold and silver really for a long time before that. But getting the rest of it together, yeah, because I did not think that we would see the end of this currency's life cycle in my lifetime. And I've been studying currency life cycles since 1987. So, but it's here, and I'm not going to deny it. And that's what nobody else really seems to talk about, that this is the end of this current experiment, and they have to reset us into a new system. I mean, do you think that's going to be where they're touted soft landing historically?
Yeah, the soft landing seems like a bit of a fairy tale at this point, but when you watch Powell at these press conferences and really all these Fed officials, I mean, it seems like they're more in the business of managing perceptions than actually combating the problems that we have systemically throughout this economy. And I mean, I think their actions kind of confirm that. You see the Fed claiming that they're trying to fight inflation by hiking rates, but they ignore the massive deficits and the huge levels of debt throughout the system, some of the real contributors to inflation.
How about this as a contributor to inflation?
I was hoping I would get to see the cash gun today. But yeah, that's pretty much what's been going on. The Fed has been monetizing trillions of dollars of debt over the past decade plus, and now we seem to be reaping the rewards. Do you think that this crisis, which we may be headed towards, do you think that there's a level of intentionality behind it, or do you think that it's they just don't know what they're doing?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, but I would definitely say that there is a level of intentionality, because when you look at what the government's doing and the Federal Reserve is doing with fiscal and monetary policy, they are at odds with each other. And what? They don't know this, right? They know that we are at the end and that they need to transition. And in order to make that transition and have the public adopt a digital currency willingly and easily, there are a few things that have to happen. Number one, they have to attempt to maintain public confidence. And that's frankly the biggest thing, and the biggest thing that's at risk for them. But they also needed to make it seem as normal as possible. And so, we've had since 2009 Bitcoin cryptocurrencies out there, and that's gotten a lot of eyeballs. And so they're playing their normal playbook, but yeah, they need like a huge crisis. And I think what happened in 2020 was a test. and also to cover up what was actually happening in the money market, global money markets. But yeah, I think it's intentional because in order for people to be scared enough to accept this next piece that they want to shove down our throats, they need a huge crisis. So yeah, that's why they call you smart. It is intentional.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? That seems to be the playbook for some time now. The whole problem reaction solution thing. You know, one thing that we did witness in the past couple of years in that intervention is that oftentimes it seems like the intervention from governments and central banks can be worse than the crisis itself. You know,
Good point.
moving forward, if we see some return to debt monetization, or as you say, the release of a central bank digital currency, presumably to have more even minute controls over individual actors in the economy. What do you think will be the fallout from that? I mean, what do you think this is going to look like for your average individual out there who, you know, may actually be begging for this intervention when the time comes?
Well, desperate people do desperate things. And if you look at what happens, I mean, it's not like you have to go back in history. You can, look to the South in South America. You can look to the East in Europe and in the Middle East. And you can see that what happens is that when people cannot feed their families and they become hungry and hopeless, they make choices that they would not otherwise make, and all confidence in the system and in those that are ruling the system is subsequently lost. So when you ask me, this is actually my hope. Now, I hope it doesn't get violent, but we need a revolution. And we need to come together in community to support each other and to say no. Because the reality is we vote with our wallets. If anybody thinks that we actually have fair representation in our governments, I mean, think again. They're easily bought. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's a fact. So I think we could definitely be coming up to a period of time where there is a revolution by the masses, and that's been building. And it was building pretty substantially before March of 2020 hit. And then, of course, that gave the powers that be the ability to squash all those public outcries, but they're rising again. And people are even hungrier and getting even more hopeless. And now, hey, the Fed just came out with a report that 80% of the people have used up their pandemic savings. Shocker. Well, they were given those pandemic savings not to save them, but to enable them to continue to consume. So with what's happening with the interest rates and what's happening with the savings and what's happening with the debt levels of consumers and the confidence levels of those consumers, what do you think is going to happen when consumers stop having the ability to consume? I mean, at some point, debt matters.
And we see the debt just getting bigger and bigger. Would we just hit 33 trillion? It feels like we just hit 32. I mean, that was just months ago. So the pace of change here is getting pretty dramatic. I want to shift gears and get your take on the international situation because certainly things here domestically in the US are a mess, but we also have, not to be ignored, the de-dollarization, the rise of the BRICS alliance, the end of some of the major powers like China buying US debt. So it seems like a convergence of factors. We're trying to sell more debt into the market. The rest of the world is not nearly as interested in it. We're seeing rates spike up. What role do you think that the rise of the global south and the potential end of the petrodollar system, how big of a factor will that be in the coming economic shifts?
Well, I think that's a huge factor in the coming economic shifts. And you talked about the BRICS, but again, I'm going to go back to, is it really them against us? Or since 190 countries are part of the International Monetary Fund, that's every Treasury Secretary and every central bank chief, and they meet pretty regularly. I am not 100% convinced, and I, of course, could be wrong about this, but I'm not really convinced that this isn't part of the plan to shift, because I lived through that shift in 1971. I'm about to be 69 years old, and I'm so grateful for my age, because I was an old enough teenager to not really understand what was happening when we went completely off the gold standard in 71. But I remember all the chaos around that, right? We had the Vietnam War, you had women's lib, you had the civil rights movement, you had the oil embargo, you had high inflation, you had the stock markets imploding, and other factors that are the same kinds of things that typically happen during a currency regime shift. But this one is bigger. Goes back more like to the Industrial Revolution, because we're going from, a paperback system to a digital back system where all assets are turned into trading tokens and can be easily moved and utilized around the world. And you brought up such a good point when you were talking about the central banker's job, which is perception management, because that was really that is a formal program in our government. And we are a consumer-driven economy, because we are 70% of our GDP is consumer-driven, right? So we've been turned into that, and we just have, it feels like a Stephen King novel to me, where you have all these different pieces and parts that are having all of this conflict and all of this movement around the edge, and then they come into the core and everything explodes. And I think we're really, 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 really close to that core. But, no country has ever retained its status as the world reserve currency. And frankly, if you go into the FRED, the Federal Reserve Economic Department, FRED, and you take a look at, there are a couple, I go in there all the time, I use those charts all the time. But if you go in there and you take a look at the data, it's likely to be a bit more honest, not completely, because they jury rig formulas so it looks the way they want to. But there is virtually no purchasing power left in the dollar, and that has sped up dramatically, first since 2008 and then since 2020. Dramatically. So if you have no more purchasing power to inflate away, and the key tool that they have are interest rates, and interest rates have been anchored near zero for 15 years, and now they're trying to raise them. And that, of course, is breaking the system that they put in place, which was based on free money and taking on more and more debt. Then, are we going to lose our status? Sure. If you go in there and you look at the treasuries owned by the Federal Reserve, you'll notice that they first started buying treasuries in the end. I think it was, don't hold me to exactly to this date, but I think it was either December 13th or December 18th, where they started buying treasuries from the Fed in 2000. Well, wait a minute. Here we are in 2023. In 2000, prior to 2008, that was what third world countries did. But we've already lost the interest of the world, even leading into the 2008 crisis, and certainly since 2020. So yeah, all countries are monetizing the debt. Do I think China is going to back their currency with gold and become the world reserve currency? Why would they need to put themselves or want to put themselves in that position? They've been accumulating massive amounts of gold. They've been on a 10-month gold buying spree like crazy. Plus, they've encouraged their population to do it. Let the IMF do it. The IMF is in a far better position to be the one world currency, because it is a basket of currencies, and they can add every currency into that basket, which is exactly what they're planning on doing. So again, then you end up with a local currency, the US dollar, a digital dollar, but then you have this layer of one world currency that's all in charge. It's all in charge by the IMF. The IMF is in complete control of the global monetary system. And if you look at countries where the IMF have gone in and taken control of the monetary system, like Greece, okay, or that's just one example. Every country that's ended up being indebted to the IMF, the population, the public has paid via more and more and more austerity. And that means that they take your wealth away. They take your work. I mean, we work for not exactly this garbage, because this is mine in gold and silver we trust, but they, by design, we vote with our wallets. So if you stay in fiat money products, that's your vote. And when we go into this system, you have no alternatives. If you get physical and it's in your possession, they don't have as much control over you, especially if you have everything else secure, your food. That becomes the biggest single issue for people during these transitions is food. So grow a little food, put some long storage back, depends on your circumstances, what you can do, get involved in a community garden, build your community, get to know your neighbors, get to know your local farmers, ranchers, etc. Create those relationships so that you can weather this storm, because you can't count on the government to bail you out. You're not that important. You're not that systemically important. But the too big to fails are.
Yeah, one of the things I hear in the prepping community a lot is the old phrase, you can't eat your gold and silver. So my response has always been to just have both food and precious metals, stock up on the rice in the Mylar bags. As you say, go local with your food. And even if, the economy doesn't fall apart, you'll probably be healthier as a result anyway. So
voila.
Multiple benefits. But to your point about the U.S. following this kind of third world program of debt monetization since 2000, we are witnessing that it's exceedingly difficult for them to put the inflation genie back in the bottle. Their program of quantitative tightening, they've gone down from just under $9 trillion to, I think they're right at about 8 now on their balance sheet. But we've already seen interest rates spiking up to a level that is stressing out the system so dramatically. So it seems almost impossible that they'll be able to reverse course on that completely. And we probably will see a repeat of the 1970s. And what did we see in the 70s? We saw gold over the course of that decade go from $35 to, I think it peaked around $850 in 1980. So do you think that we're going to see a similar move in the precious metals this time around?
I do, but I first want to make a comment to your comment about people saying you can't eat gold or silver, which actually there is colloidal silver, and there is colloidal gold, so you can actually eat it. But if you look in countries that have been experiencing hyperinflation, like Venezuela, they actually had things priced in their bolivar and also in terms of gold. If you look at like Zimbabwe, able-bodied people go out and pan for gold. So while you aside from the colloidal way, you're not really gonna chew up this coin, right? It's solid. The reality is you can convert it into goods that you need because it's universal money. Wherever you are in the world, when I travel, I always make sure that I have gold and silver coins with me, chains, things like that. So if I'm somewhere in another country and I need money fast, their local currency, for some reason I can't access, I always have that.
I actually have some in-laws that have lived in Venezuela throughout the hyperinflation over the past decade or so. And they did exactly what you described. Now, they didn't have gold and silver coins. They're not stackers, but they did use a lot of their holdings of precious metals jewelry to get by. And it's not like in those situations there wasn't food available. There was always food and consumer goods available on the black market. It's just that the local currency, the bolivar, wouldn't buy you anything. So they either had to, I think actually in most cases, what they ended up doing was converting their jewelry into US dollars and then purchasing things on the black market with the US dollar. But in our situation, what do you do when the dollar is the currency being inflated? There's no reserve currency other than gold and silver to fall back on.
Exactly. And you also brought up a really good point, which is gold and silver in any form, is monetary at its base. So I happen to have quite a bit, because over the years I'd go to yard sales, estate sales, and especially, people are like, oh, it gets tarnished. Oh, I don't want this sterling silver. I'll take it. I mean, this happens to be a sterling silver chopstick. Do you think I would care about cutting a piece of this off, right? To buy what I needed to buy? No. And so, even though they could, but in Venezuela for a while convert to dollars, the restrictions that governments put around their monetary policy and the public's ability to convert into other currencies like US dollars was actually pretty limited. And so then there are instances where things are actually priced in terms of gold and in terms of other currencies. And you can just clip off a little piece of gold or a little piece of silver, like I just was explaining, to buy those goods and services. And that's what people have to understand. You're right. It's available. You can get it. But what are you going to use to buy it? Universal money. And the reason why it's universal money is because both physical gold and silver are used in every single sector of the global economy. So there's always demand. You tell me this crap is used in one place. And hey, here's a whole bunch of currencies, and there are ever so many more that have absolutely no purchasing power value. And I'd even put, dollars. We have lost most of the purchasing power value in these dollars. People just haven't quite recognized that yet. So I believe we're going to end up going into about a hyperinflationary depression. And then the IMF the IMF, the Federal Reserve, the central bankers will come out and say, well, if you give us these CBDCs, we promise there won't be any inflation because we can have our finger on the pulse of the economy 24/7 and tweak it. And those are their words, not mine, as well as then there are no limitations to how low they can push the interest rates. So no, there won't be any inflation. There will be deflation at such a deep level that you're sitting there watching your savings evaporate because of negative rates. What are you likely to do? You're likely to go out and buy anything. I mean, it really doesn't matter what it is, anything, just to attempt to hold your principal. You've already gotten all your purchasing power. The only thing left is your principal. And this happens, we vote with our wallets. So I buy gold and silver. I put my money into food, water, energy, etc., my whole mantra piece. And I've been doing that in earnest. Well, the gold and silver since in earnest 2002, because that's when I got the technical signal that we're at the end of this currency's life cycle. But the rest of it, I became an urban farmer. I mean, honestly, do I look like a farmer to you? But I am, because I believe my research. I know how deeply I delve into things, and I believe it. So we all need to be prepared for it. And if all you have is this crap, or you only have, something is better than nothing, but you want to have as much as possible. Or have people say, well, what percentage of your portfolio is in gold and silver? Well, considering the fact that I've been doing this on some level since I was 10 years old, I have a very high level of comfort. And having studied currencies and currency life cycles since 1987, I am frankly crystal clear on where we are in this trend cycle. So personally, I am all in, period. I am all in. When the facts change, when we get through this mess, when we burn off this massive debt bubble that is already in process of popping, this is my bazooka, because it's used in every single sector of the global economy. So it's never gone to zero. And they haven't been able to duplicate the qualities that both gold and silver have in the labs. They can duplicate diamonds, but they can't duplicate gold and silver.
They are money. They've been money for thousands of years. And I don't think that that's going to change just because of the actions of central bankers, who, in fact, as you pointed out, are continuing to accumulate the stuff themselves. So we can just look at what they're doing. I do think that when you say, going all in, a lot of folks out there, they struggle with the normalcy bias. If they recall a time when the dollar was backed by gold, it's a, memory from 50 plus years ago. And
Right.
so they don't think that this sort of thing can happen. But I agree that, it may come to the point where people are forced to become farmers, whether they like it or not, just out of necessity. I remember reading some accounts from the Weimar hyperinflation about how the poor rural farmers actually did better than a lot of the middle class urbanites because they had potatoes and greens and things, so they at least got to eat. And the folks in the
And
cities
barter.
actually were kind of envious of them.
And barter. Because if you have potatoes and your neighbor has milk, okay, here's some potatoes, I'll have some milk, right? So have some eggs, whatever it is. So what are you going to do to put yourself in a position not just to weather this storm, but you brought it up earlier. There's always opportunity in crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, who says that it's only the 1% that get to take advantage of this crisis? How about we take advantage of this crisis? The public has the opportunity to have the wealth shift their way. And how do you do that? By holding your purchasing power. Because right now you have these income producing assets. Hey, look at this. Real estate prices are at the highest level. Now, not in all markets, but certainly the report just came out. And, real estate prices are at the highest level. So people think they can escape into real estate, but they forget property taxes. They also forget what happens to mortgages during hyperinflationary events. So there are a lot of risks to it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have property. I mean, I have my home here, which is an urban farm, and I have my bug out location, which I've been working on now for about 2.5 years. And that's also, we're just finished putting in the orchards. We're just finishing planting out the greenhouses because food is such a significant issue. But you have to be prepared to be as self-sufficient and independent inside of community as possible, because one person can't do it all themselves. Maybe they don't have the resources. So if you don't have the resources, you better have the skill sets, right? If somebody comes to me, okay, what are your skill sets? I know what skills we need to have here. And so far we have doctors, we have engineers, we have builders, handy guys, farmers, chefs, a massage therapist, which personally I think is really important in a bug out situation. But we have people with different skill sets. So I do think that this is also a phenomenal time to bone up on your skills. I mean, I don't want to, but if I had to, I could lay irrigation because it was just me and I had to figure it out. But much easier having a community around you, everybody bringing their talents and their gifts and supporting each other, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think community building is an often overlooked aspect of preparedness. But all of those things, whether it be learning skills or building communities, that's all going to be a lot easier to do now before the crap hits the fan. And we should take advantage of this opportunity. And, when it comes to the metals, even we see this, I think people delay, they went for a dip. And what did we see happen in March earlier this year when the banks started to fail? There was this huge influx and all the online dealers had this long shipping delay. Local coin shops were running low on inventory. Premiums were exploding. And I believe that's probably just a preview of what we're going to see the next time around. So now, I mean, premiums have come down. Since the Fed last week, we've seen a pullback in the price of gold and silver. Don't
Because
use
the dollar's getting so strong.
Yeah, yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's weird how this whole system works. I mean, you've worked in the industry. I never have, so sometimes it seems a little Byzantine and beyond my comprehension that you can see the dollar index going up. But really what it is just all these fiat currencies. It's a race to the bottom, right? And
Exactly.
it's just a relative strength. It's like the healthiest patient in the terminal ward is the US dollar for now.
I'd question that, but okay. But yes, to your point, it is. It's relative, and in the meantime, every single currency is losing purchasing power. Has your cost of living gone down because we have a stronger dollar? No, it hasn't. Has it become easier to purchase the and maintain a standard of living? No. We basically annihilated the middle class, right? So we have two classes. We have the 1%ers, and then you got the 99%ers.
We need to get prepared. Like you said, it shouldn't just be the 1% that gets to capitalize on the opportunities that will be around the corner. And I believe that folks who are prepared, who are independent of systems of support, and who are not forced to, beg for CBDC handouts just to put food in their mouths, will be the folks who are best positioned to do so. I do want to just say a huge thank you for joining me today, Lynette. I'll put a link to your YouTube channel down in the description. Before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to tell the viewers?
Well, yes, because there's actually, we have two YouTube channels. One is the economic channel where I try and translate financial noise, and the other is Beyond Gold and Silver. So we'll make sure you have that link too, where we do our best to meet any people where they are. So if you've never set back food and done long storage with it, okay, well, we'll take your hand and walk you step by step through that. So we cover all the mantra pieces: food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter, and beyond gold and silver. And then we have a Thrivers community, because people feel alone, right? I try and tell my friends and family what I see, and they look at me like I have a million heads. And so you're not really alone. There's actually quite a bit of us, and there's quite a few of us on a global basis too. So local community is critical. Global community is even more critical, because in order for us to retain our freedoms and our choices on the other side of this transition, we have to stand up and we have to say no. And to your point, if you are completely dependent upon the system, how do you say no when you're trying to feed your family? Whereas I can sleep well because I have everything covered. I will be as surprised as anybody else the moment that it happens, or I should say I'll be shocked, not surprised, shocked, because even as a technician, I can't tell you the second before we lose all choice, but I can tell you I have been racing to make sure that when we lose all choice, I don't lose all choice, and the community members around me don't lose all choice. So that's what I highly recommend. I think community is arguably the most important part of this, because we need to come together to support each other and say no. But you got to keep stacking. You never have enough gold. You never have enough silver. You never have enough of anything like that. But you can have too much of this crap, fiat, because that's going away.
Well, I think that all is very wise advice, and I'll put links down below so everybody can check that out. I'll have to have you on the channel again sometime, Lynette. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
I would love that.